Please, Dr. Breitbart.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here today. I want to thank Dr. Fang, I want to thank Frank, all the members of the Taiwan Psycho-Oncology Society, all the officers of the board, all of you, and everyone who had anything to do with me being able to come here to Taipei to do our workshop yesterday and to participate in today's meeting. I also want to thank Chantel Lim for helping me with all the travel arrangements and hotel arrangements. Thank you very much, Chantel. So it's a real honor for me to be here. I had an opportunity with Dr. Fang to look at the hospital and look at the palliative care center, and I'm very impressed with the quality, and the cancer center. I'm very impressed with the quality of the cancer care that's delivered here, but we have just come from the World Congress of Psycho-Oncology in Australia, and we heard from the Taiwan Psycho-Oncology Society of all the great progress that's being made in Taiwan on screening and identifying distressed patients with cancer. And I think that you all can be very, very proud of what you are accomplishing as a multidisciplinary group of clinicians who care for cancer patients. So it's my honor to be here today. My talk has a very simple title, and it has to do with existential issues in psycho-oncology and cancer care. And what I'm going to focus on in my lecture today is that there is some usefulness in helping patients confront their mortality, to help them face death. And that one of the goals of psychosocial care, particularly with patients near the end of life, is to work with patients not only in a supportive fashion, but to also strive towards a higher goal, perhaps a more difficult goal, of helping patients accept the life that they have lived, to find meaning in their lives, and to accept the life they've lived so that they can face death with a sense of peace and equanimity. So I will speak a little bit about this particular topic. I have been at Memorial Sloan Kettering for almost 30 years. I trained there as a fellow with Dr. Jimmy Holland, and then I stayed on as a member of the faculty. And my clinical work and my research work and my teaching have evolved and transformed over the many years that I've been there. And as I told many of the people in this room who were at the workshop yesterday, my initial focus was on very medically oriented psychiatric issues like delirium and depression and pain and fatigue and various psychopharmacologic interventions. But as I got older and as I worked at Memorial Sloan Kettering for a longer period of time, I began to shift my focus of care to patients with more advanced disease, and I began to see very difficult problems that did not, that were not easily labeled with a psychiatric diagnosis. What I saw was a level of existential distress and despair that was not really a function of having a clinical depression or an anxiety disorder, but it was the human experience of confronting death and having to find a way to achieve a sense of completion in one's life and to have a sense that one's life has some coherent meaning. And so my work began to shift into developing counseling or psychotherapy to help patients with that aspect of the last part of their life, the last months or year of their life. Much of my work has been involved in trying to expand the concept of psycho-oncology and the concepts of palliative medicine to expand what adequate palliative medicine was. Can I go back one? Back? Yeah, I'm sorry. To expand the concept of what adequate palliative care was beyond the focus on pain and symptom control to include psychiatric and psychosocial aspects of cancer care and supportive care and palliative care. We did that in the first decade or so of my time at Sloan Kettering, doing work on depression, delirium, anxiety, etc. And then we began to focus on existential and spiritual aspects of care in developing counseling interventions focusing on enhancing meaning and end-of-life task completion, dignity, conserving dignity. But over the last year or two, I've begun to think about, ultimately, when working with patients with advanced disease, what is the ultimate goal of our care? And I started to ask the question whether it was not appropriate for us to have as a goal of care to help patients find a way to develop a peaceful acceptance of death. That all of this care should culminate or end in a peaceful acceptance of death. Is this something that we could achieve with our patients? Is this something that we had the tools to help patients accomplish this goal? Did we have the kind of psychotherapy or counseling intervention tools that could be used by our palliative care, nursing, and medical oncology colleagues that could help them work with their patients to achieve this same goal? Now I've got it. Now, I've tried to do this work through my research, through my teaching, and also through my writing. I mentioned yesterday that I'm the editor-in-chief of an international journal published by Cambridge University Press. It's now in its 10th year. It's called Palliative and Supportive Care. And it's the only international palliative care journal that focuses on psychiatric, psychosocial, existential, and spiritual domains of care. And if you're interested in submitting an article, you can always email me and ask me if it's appropriate. And this is our online website for submission of articles. This is the second edition of the Oxford Handbook of Psychiatry and Palliative Medicine, which I co-edited with my friend and colleague Harvey Max Chachinov. And this textbook is a very large textbook that focuses on every aspect of psycho-oncology and end-of-life care, including many chapters on psychotherapy for patients with advanced cancer. Now, we in psycho-oncology play a very important role. In many ways, we are the doctors of the soul. We are the new philosophers. We teach patients we advise them on how to live life and how to approach the end of their life. Amongst the Greeks, a philosopher was a doctor of the soul, prescribed the proper attitude and practices to foster health and happiness. And now, if you take the word psychiatry, it comes from the Greek root psyche. Psyche is the goddess of the soul. But the Greek understanding of the soul is that the soul is made up of the mind and the spirit. And I actually, as a iatrogenic physician's doctorate, so in fact psychiatry, for instance, are the doctors of the soul. Psychology favorite French existential philosophers, Emmanuel Levinas, defined philosophy not so much as the love of wisdom, but the wisdom of love, the understanding of the importance of love. And if you attended my meaning center psychotherapy workshop yesterday, you'll recall that one of the most important sources of meaning is through love, dedicating yourself to someone, dedicating yourself to something. Love and caring are the two ways in which we connect to the world, and we enhance our sense of meaning. Human beings have several basic existential concerns and questions. Where did I come from? What am I doing here? Where am I going? And Carl Sagan, the astrophysicist, would say that any human being who contemplates their place in the universe is engaging in a quintessentially human spiritual exercise. So when we ask ourselves these questions, we are engaging in existential issues, and we're also engaging in spiritual issues from the perspective of wanting to know our place in the universe. Now, when I suggest that it might be beneficial, not only to us as clinicians, but to our patients, to open an opportunity to confront death, to face our mortality, to face death. This is not always universally accepted, particularly in the medical community and in our society. Many would say that, particularly in the West, we have a death-denying culture. We do everything we can to possibly avoid thinking about death and deny death everywhere we can. And in fact, many philosophers said that we cannot constantly think of death. In fact, our minds will not allow us to think about death too much. We are biologically not wired to allow that to happen. We have biological defense mechanisms that make us think of something else quickly after we have a sort of a biological fear response. So one cannot constantly think about death. But what I'm suggesting is that from time to time, confronting death, understanding that we are mortal, can have the benefit of informing us on how best to live our lives. For many people, death is a call to life. It reminds us how important life is. One of my teachers said that you have to come to terms with your ending. You have to practice dying. If you understand ending, the beginning has a totally different meaning. What he was talking about, I think, is the fact that if you know where you're going, then you can chart the course of your travel, the course of your life better. It's a little bit like a GPS system in your car. Does anyone have a GPS system in a car? Right? So the first thing you do with your GPS system, what do? The first thing you do is you type in where you're going. And then the GPS system can tell you how to get there. But it sometimes gives you a choice. Do you want to go the fastest route? Or do you want to take the scenic route, where you get to enjoy the trip? So if you know where you're going, you can decide how you want to create that course of your life. So knowing that we're mortal helps inform us on how to live. And it informs us that we need to live authentically. We need to live our own unique lives. We need to create our lives and create the direction of our lives and the identity and meaning in our lives. And we need to change and transform ourselves based on the events that occur in life, the gifts that life gives us, and the things that life takes from us. and we need to learn how to respond to both. That is our freedom, that is the choice we have, how we respond to what life gives us and what life takes away. In my thinking about death and how it informs life, when you look at death, it reminds you of your responsibility to live, and it guides your path. Death exists to teach us how precious life is. It forces us to strive towards authenticity in every moment and act of our lives. In creating meaning-centered psychotherapy, I discovered that I had created an existentially oriented psychotherapy, but I had done so without any education in existentialism or existential philosophy or psychotherapy. So for the next 8 to 10 years, I tried to teach myself something about existentialism. And so I want to share with you a summary of what I've learned that I think is important for clinicians to understand about the patients that they take care of, and about us as human beings who are also clinicians, physicians and nurses and counselors. There are some unique characteristics of human beings. We're different than other animals. We are unique compared to every other animal and plant in the world. First of all, human beings are uniquely aware of our existence. We are the only animals that are aware that we are alive, and we can objectively contemplate ourselves. The second unique aspect of being human is that meaning-making is a defining characteristic of human beings as a species. No other animal engages in trying to find meaning in their lives. You know, ducks don't do it, cows don't do it, mice don't do it. Finally, connectedness is essential to survival of the human species, and it's the essence of human experience. We as human beings have learned that in order to survive, we need to be connected to each other in families, in groups, in communities, in cultures. And we risk death by disconnection from people and isolation. And the most important time when one needs to relate and connect with others is when you are most vulnerable, when you're sick with cancer, when you feel ashamed, when you feel imperfect. You can disconnect and isolate yourself, and that is the most important time not to isolate and to reconnect. And so as human beings, we need to be connected to each other. And finally, human beings are unique in that we're the only animal that has the ability to grow and change and transform ourselves. Now, in terms of human beings being uniquely aware of our existence, this was a concept first set forth a few hundred years ago by Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher. Human beings are unique in that we're aware of our existence. Kierkegaard basically wrote that because we're aware of our existence, we have two emotions. One is the emotion of awe, the awesomeness of life, the awesomeness of the beauty and the incredible experience, the joyful experience of being alive. All of the beautiful things in life, nature, love, food, music, etc. And we also experience dread. We recognize that we all die, that we're mortal, and that death can happen at any moment. And this dread is also sometimes called death anxiety or existential terror. Kierkegaard called death anxiety the struggle of the living against non-being. A famous social psychologist, anthropologist, Ernest Bettner, wrote that human beings, in order to deal with the terror of death, we create cultures. And many of the earliest cultures were religions, but we have now all sorts of cultures, all sorts of social groups and organizations. And these cultures are humanly constructed systems that provide beliefs about reality and reduce death anxiety. So all cultures tell us about the origins of the universe. They answer those very basic questions that we have as human beings. Where did I come from? What am I doing here? Where am I going? So all cultures basically tell us where we came from. They tell us what we have to do here in the world, what our role is here. They prescribe appropriate behaviors and values and virtues, and they offer either a literal or symbolic path to immortality. They tell us where we're going. They tell us that death is either literally not the end, that there's a heaven or something like that, or we're reincarnated or something like that. Or they provide a symbolic path to immortality. We will live on in the hearts of the people who love us. We will live on in the people whose lives we've touched and changed. We'll live on in our works that will affect others. It's like a stone that's thrown in the water and creates a rippling effect of waves. Our lives will have effect way beyond our lifetime. So human beings manage this existential terror, death anxiety, by believing that life is meaningful. And they manage this terror by achieving self-esteem that's attained by meeting or exceeding the standards of the culture. So one of the goals of the life that you are responsible to create is not only that you need to create a unique life that you live to its fullest potential, a life of meaning and identity and direction, but you also need to create a life in which you feel you are a valued member of a society in a world of meaning. The second basic characteristic is that human beings are meaning-making animals. Meaning-making is the defining characteristic of human beings as a species. I talked about Viktor Frankl's work yesterday in our meaning-centered psychotherapy workshop. Frankl proposed that the need to find or create meaning in life was a basic motivating force of human beings. Frankl wrote that life always has meaning from the very first moment of life to the last moment of life. That the possibility of experiencing meaning existed from the very first moment of life until the last moment of life. And that the sources of meaning are very common and predictable and identifiable. That meaning is derived from connecting to life through love, engaging in life through work, and through our attitude towards suffering, and also the legacy that we inherit, the legacy we live, and the legacy we leave behind for the future. Now, many existentialists believe that the world does not have any externally given meaning, that it's completely up to us as human beings to create our own meaning. We have to create the meaning in our lives. But some philosophers, like Frankl and others, believe in the possibility of some ultimate meaning, a meaning that was predetermined by a creator of some type, and that human beings must search and hopefully find and fulfill this meaning. So if there is such an ultimate meaning, that's wonderful, and we need to keep searching for that. But our responsibility as human beings is to create meaning in our lives. We need to do our part. there are some existential facts of life, things that happen in life to everyone. And when you get old enough to have as much gray hair as me, life experience teaches you that in life, inevitably, you will encounter suffering, have to confront the fact that you're mortal and that death is real, and you will experience guilt. Now, Karl Jaspers talked about suffering as any encounter that limits your freedom, anything that produces a limitation. So when you have anything that you want to do and that you're limited from doing causes suffering, encountering limitation causes suffering. One of the things that happens when you encounter limitations is that the trajectory that you expected your life to take changes. And so that impacts on your sense of identity. The life that you're trying to create, you're trying to create a certain identity. And that becomes affected by suffering experiences or limitations. Many say that death is the ultimate limitation. Confrontation with death is the ultimate limitation. And finally, guilt is existential guilt. The idea that no matter how much you try to live a life that was unique to you, just you, live it to its fullest potential, to live a life of identity and meaning and transformation, etc., that no matter how hard you try, you can never really achieve that. And so everyone falls short. And because of that, we experience guilt, existential guilt, that we could have done more, we could have achieved more. A good example of that is Albert Einstein's last words on his deathbed, which were, "If only I knew more mathematics." So even someone like Albert Einstein felt he could have done more. And everyone experiences this existential guilt, and this existential guilt is experienced and manifest in our patients, in us, but in our patients by anger, anxiety, demoralization, depression, etc. Now, if you get old enough to live 60 years or more, you understand that these existential facts of life exist. But if you're 21 years old and you have osteogenic sarcoma that's spread to your lungs, you have a premature confrontation with these existential facts of life. And so you experience these existential facts of life. And what happens when you experience these existential facts of life is, for many patients, they develop a profound sense of loss of meaning. They become demoralized, and they lose a sense of meaning, value, and purpose. And some patients are able to maintain their sense of meaning, and very rarely there are patients who, because they confront these facts of life and the limitations of life, they understand the urgency of living life more fully and vividly every day. So life becomes even more valuable and more meaningful to them. Every moment of life that they have is more meaningful to them than before they fully understood that life was just finite. And it's for these patients with loss of meaning that we develop meaning-centered psychotherapy to try to enhance or sustain a sense of meaning, trying to learn from these patients here. Irvin Yalom is a famous existential psychotherapist. He wrote a very important textbook called Existential Psychotherapy. And he talked about 4 basic human existential concerns: the inevitability of death, the fear that we will have lived a life without meaning, the fear that we will become disconnected from other human beings, and we will be isolated, existentially isolated. And then finally, freedom, the idea that there is no externally given meaning or plan for our lives, so it's completely up to us to create our lives and to create meaning in our lives. And this comes with a sense of responsibility. And because we cannot ever really fully achieve our goal of living our lives uniquely to its fullest potential, we experience this existential guilt. But freedom is also something that we seek in the sense of trying to overcome limitations or transcend limitations to achieve a state of freedom and peace. Responsibility is our ability to respond to the fact of our existence. We have a responsibility to create a life of meaning, identity, direction, connection, self-actualization, to become a valued member of a culture and a world of meaning. We need to live this life uniquely to ourselves, and we need to live it to its full potential. This requires will. Where do we get the energy to have will? The will to create a life. Will is fueled by love and hope and meaning and the drive towards freedom, and it requires courage. Courage meaning living life with your heart open, understanding that if you take the risk of trying to live life fully, you may fail, you may die. You have to be the courage to love. You need to have your heart open to love, having the courage, knowing that you may not be loved back in return, or that love may be lost, especially if that love may die, that love may disappear. You may die because of love. Courage involves a commitment to meaning, a commitment to life, a commitment to hope, a commitment to freedom, and a commitment to deal with anxiety. To understand that you need to control what you can and have faith that what you cannot control will evolve the way it will evolve, and that you will be able to respond to how that happens and what evolves. We all fail at this impossible task of creating this life. And thus we all experience existential guilt. We all feel imperfect. And we are all vulnerable. And paradoxically, as I said the other day in the Meaning Center workshop, it is our imperfection that allows us to love and be loved. It gives us the ability to love someone else, to empathize with someone else. If we were perfect, we couldn't experience love. And we really can't love perfect people. And there are no perfect people. The task of facing death is to relieve existential guilt. And that means to forgive ourselves, to accept ourselves, and to do what we can to restore or sustain meaning in our lives. So the task of dying is to forgive ourselves for all the things that we could not achieve, or the things that we did that weren't quite right. So this is the arc of life. Each of us has a trajectory of our lives that we anticipate. And what happens is sometimes along this arc, an event occurs, a cancer diagnosis. So you're a young man, who's 40 years old, just starting to reach a successful point in their career with several small children, and you develop terminal cancer. Your trajectory takes a different direction. You will not live the life you thought you were going to live. And this gap between the life that you thought you were going to live and the life that you will live, what should have been and what will be, that gap represents the existential guilt. The larger the gap, the more existential guilt, the more anger, the more depression, etc. And the goal is to transcend or connect these two trajectories, to try to find a way to get back to this trajectory in either literal or symbolic ways. Human beings are unique in that we're the only animals that have the ability to transform. And this occurs, transformation or change usually occurs during periods of change, transition, where we move into a new phase of life, where we change as a person. Where we change as a person in very significant ways that are difficult. When a cancer patient receives news of a life-threatening cancer, they need to assimilate this information. They need to accept that this really is real, this is happening to me. They need to accommodate to this new information of the event. And they need to modify or take up a new role or identity. Now, suffering, limitations produce existential guilt, and another word for existential guilt is imperfection or vulnerability. And what's really important is the attitude that you choose to take towards your imperfection or vulnerability. If you choose to be ashamed of your imperfection, you threaten disconnection from everyone else and existential isolation. And you experience all of the negative aspects of existential guilt, the demoralization, depression, etc. If you're able to make the choice that your vulnerability makes it possible for you to have empathy, and it's what makes you more able to love and be loved, then you understand that you need to connect or transcend these vulnerabilities and imperfections. And that's when you can experience the positive aspects of existential guilt and vulnerability, to approach life with courage and wholeheartedness, to have compassion, to overcome these limitations, etc., transform and change. So, no matter what you cannot control about your life or cancer illness, you always have the ability to control the attitude you take towards the limitation, towards the outcome, the consequence of that limitation. Many people are confused about what transcendence means, and we hear about transcendental meditation, think it's something very exotic. But in fact, transcendence is basically connection. Connection is the essence of the human experience. Connection is our ability to love. Connection is our ability to forge meaningful, authentic relations with other people. Transcendence is connection and love, and our ability to rise above our own individual concerns and to connect to others, connect to something greater than ourselves. Transcendence leads to freedom. Once you achieve meaning, you achieve freedom, you achieve peace. And that's where we feel safest. You need to, in Frankel's word, dedicate yourself to someone or something, or like Bob Dylan sings, you've got to serve somebody. I don't know if anybody know that song? Yes, you do? Okay. The greatest gift is to love someone and be loved in return, authentically, with all of your vulnerabilities seen. If we can achieve this in life, we've achieved the most important thing that can be accomplished in life. My brother's son died of epilepsy when he was 28 years old. Actually 26 years old when he was in medical school. And I gave a eulogy at his funeral. And it was my job to try to make some meaning out of his death. This is what everyone looked to me for. And I could not find a particular meaning the death of my nephew was meaningless. But what I could say about my nephew's short life was that in his lifetime, he found love. He was able to find the woman that he loved. He found a woman who loved him. He was able to be loved in return in his own imperfection and love someone else. He was able and got married, and he was able to find the work he wanted to dedicate his life to, medicine. And there are people who live 80 years and never have that experience. So that was my only solace for my brother and his family, my family, that even though my nephew lived a short life, he was able to accomplish at least two things: dedicating himself to someone and something that many people never ever find. As a clinician, I see many patients who are facing death, and very often they say to me, "Dr. Breitbart, how can I live knowing that I will die? How can I live?" And I've been thinking about this a long time. And you know, in my early training, I was taught that my role as a psychiatrist and a therapist was basically to listen to patients, to provide supportive psychotherapy, to empathize with patients. But I was never taught that it was my role as a psychotherapist to suggest ways of coping with the finiteness of life, or even giving some advice about how to live in the face of death. But as I became more experienced and more senior, and I began to have a little bit of courage, and I thought that I had learned some things that maybe could be helpful to patients when they're facing death, in terms of how to live in that space between life and death, having 3 to 6 months of life ahead. There might be some lessons that I've learned over the years that could be helpful for patients. And I did learn many lessons from my patients, and I learned a lesson from a very old text in Jewish sacred texts from the book of Job. Has anyone here ever read the book of Job? Yes? Okay. So it's an interesting, there are about 6 or 7 different versions of the book of Job, and nobody really knows who wrote the book of Job. And it's not even clear that it's written, that it was written from the Jewish tradition, but that's sort of where it's categorized now. But in the book of Job, Job is seen as a pious man, a good man. He's described as an upright man, standing upright. And apparently, God and the devil speak to each other. I did not know this, but they actually talk to each other. And the devil noticed Job, and he said to God, you know, this fellow Job, he's very upright, and he's a very good man, he's pious, he believes in you very much. I bet that I could make him renounce you, deny you. God said, you really think so? And the devil said, yes. I'll make a bet that I can do that. I don't know how much they bet, but they were gambling. So God said, okay, I'll take that bet, and you can do anything that you want to Job, but just don't kill him. You can make him suffer in any way you want, but don't destroy him. So the devil said, okay. So in those days, Job was not only a pious and upright man, he was a very wealthy man. And one counted one's wealth by how much cattle you had and how many children you had. And Job was very wealthy. He had many cattle and sheep and goats. and he had 20 children, you know. He was very wealthy. I think he only had one wife, but I don't know if that counted in wealth. So Job is standing there, and one of his workers comes running up to him and says, "Sir, all of the cattle have suddenly died. And all of your cattle and sheep and goats, they're all dead and gone. And you've lost all of your material wealth." And Job goes, "Oh, that's terrible. That's really terrible." And then another worker comes running and says, "Oh, sir, all of your children were celebrating one of your children's birthdays in this stone hut, and the hut collapsed, and all of your children had died." And so now all of Job's material wealth and all of his children, his legacy was gone. Everything that gave Job meaning in his life was suddenly gone. Nothing bad happened to his wife, but apparently that didn't matter. And so what Job did is he went from standing upright, he fell to the floor. He started to take the earth, the dirt, and throw it on himself, symbolically burying himself, right? And then he started to tear his clothes and pull out his hair, representing the fact that he was disconnected from the people he loved, and he was no longer a whole person. So when I read this story, I said, this is very interesting, because what happened to Job is that when he lost what was meaningful in his life, his first reaction was to bury himself before he was dead, and to disconnect himself from all that gave meaning to his life. He was disconnected. He was no longer whole. The other thing that he did is he stopped caring about anything else that was important to him in the world. His wife, the members of his community, other members of his family. The fact that he could, if he took care of himself, he could perhaps rebuild his wealth. He could have more children. He didn't think about that. So I began to think about the story, and I began to think about how this might help patients that I encounter who ask me the question, how can I live in the face of death? And now I say to my patients, well, you have to live very carefully. What that means is you have to remember to care for yourself, care for the people you love, you have to care about your legacy, you have to have compassion and serve someone. And most important, you have to remain upright and whole. And what that means is that you have to realize that even though you have a prognosis of 3 or 6 months, you're still alive and you're still standing. You're not dead yet. So continue to have the courage to live life, to have wants and wishes, and to exert your life despite the fact that you will die. To continue to stay whole, to remain connected to all that gives meaning, value, and purpose in life. To relate, not isolate, to have courage to love. So this is what I learned from the story of Job. Now, in trying to achieve this ultimate goal of psychosocial care dealing with cancer patients who are getting the end of life, what is this term, acceptance of death? It's probably not the best term to use, but it's the term that is most commonly used. People have been trying to accept death and find ways to accept death for thousands and thousands of years, all those philosophers and cultures. But in modern palliative care, modern oncology, Kubler-Ross reminded us of acceptance of death when she talked about the stages of dying. And the last stage of dying was acceptance. Now, what Kubler-Ross meant by acceptance was coming to terms with your situation without feelings of hostility. What seemed to characterize acceptance of death is that you were somehow at peace with the fact that your situation is you're going to die. And it allows time for facing the reality of death in a constructive way. In our group, we've been examining what are the components of acceptance of death, and we realize it's a very complex and dynamic construct. It involves cognitive, emotional, and behavioral elements. And even just from the perspective of cognitive elements, there's a level of awareness. Yes, I'm aware that I'm pretty sick, which is slightly different than acknowledging that, yes, this will happen to me, or understanding the consequences of it, and then accepting it cognitively. And one can be in different places on a cognitive, emotional, behavioral level. So you can be preparing for your funeral, and prepare all of your finances, etc. On a cognitive, emotional level, you can maintain a sense of hope and say, well, I'm going to live, I'm going to beat this cancer. So there could be, patients can be at different levels of acceptance at any one time. Avery Weissman talked about this as middle knowledge, the idea that one can have dual aspects of denial at any one time. Holly Purgerson from Yale and now Dana-Farber Cancer Center has been doing work on prolonged grief disorder and also on acceptance of death. And she used the terminology peaceful awareness of terminal prognosis. And the peaceful awareness relates to the lack of hostility that Kubler-Ross talked about. So studies that were conducted by her group showed that if patients had, and this is what peaceful awareness is, it's a cognitive acceptance, an intellectual awareness of one's terminal prognosis, and an emotional acceptance, peace and equanimity, an absence of hostility in facing death, which is what Kubler-Ross was talking about. And there is now empirical evidence that suggests that if you have cognitive and emotional acceptance of death, this leads to more desirable outcomes in terminally ill patients. In Purgerson's studies, if you were able to achieve a sense of peaceful awareness of your terminal prognosis, in those patients there were higher rates of advanced care planning, there was better quality of death, and there were more positive physical and mental health outcomes for bereaved family members. Harvey Chachinoff did a study looking at how much insight into terminal prognosis cancer patients had in the palliative care unit. And he rated patients as having very good insight, or limited insight, or no insight, or very little insight. And what was very interesting is that the patients who had either partial or complete insight into their terminal prognosis had much less depressive symptom severity than the patients who had no insight. So if you had some insight into your terminal prognosis, you had an opportunity to talk about it and deal with it. If you didn't, you never dealt with it, and you remained quite depressed. This is from a larger Canadian study looking at 381 advanced cancer patients, and they were also rated on a 0 to 6 scale of acceptance of terminal prognosis. Those who were non-acceptors were much more likely to have a diagnosis of depressive or anxiety disorder and reported more hopelessness. Those who had more of a sense of peaceful acceptance or awareness of their prognosis had less depression, less anxiety, less hopelessness. So one of the questions that we have in terms of what is the proper role for a psychosocial counselor, psychosocial oncologist counselor, a psychologist, what are the goals of psychotherapy with patients near the end of life? Well, what's been a long tradition is the notion of One of the basic things you need to do is to be present and not abandon patients. So to escort the patient through the course of treatment and the dying process. Your presence in the relationship is very important. It's basic. It's like in palliative care, controlling pain and physical symptoms so that you can do some psychotherapy. The other is to provide support. And sometimes this even means allying with defenses, including the use of denial. But the question is whether we can accomplish something more ambitious, whether we can accomplish an acceptance of a life lived, help patients with a sense of life completion, help patients find some coherent meaning to the life they live, to help them understand and leave a legacy, to help them relieve existential guilt, self-forgiveness, and ultimately leading to acceptance of death. Death is like a wall. It forces you to turn around and look at the, death is like a wall that forces you to turn around and look at the life that you live. And the job of dying is to be able to find a way to accept the life that you live so that you can face death with some peace and equanimity. We now have tools for psychotherapists, counselors, psycho-oncology practitioners to work towards these goals with patients. We have meaning-centered psychotherapy, we have dignity therapy, we have calm therapy from Toronto and Gary Roden, map therapy from Carrie Lethborg in Australia, cognitive existential psychotherapy from David Kassane in Melbourne, Australia, and end-of-life narrative therapy from Karen Steinhauser. And so there are now multiple interventions that have been shown to be effective and that can help guide psychotherapists in working with patients near the end of life. These are some of the existentially informed end-of-life goals to help patients find a sense of life completion, a sense of coherent meaning in their lives, leaving a legacy, relieving existential guilt, facing death with some peace and equanimity. These are some of the important end-of-life completion tasks that patients report. They want to say goodbye to important people. They want to resolve unfinished business. They want to share time with friends and families. They want to remember personal accomplishments. We've done meaning-centered psychotherapy where a focus on meaning and the sources of meaning as resources of meaning help patients enhance a sense of meaning in their lives, improve quality of life near the end of life, decrease hopelessness, decrease psychological distress and physical symptom distress. This is the therapy. So let me just finish because I know Dr. Fun has to talk. I'll end with these existential pearls of wisdom. Love connects us to each other. Hope connects us to life. Hope is really just the possibility of experiencing meaning. Meaning is the experience of being in love with being, existing. The experience of love, connection, beauty, joy, life in all of its duality. Meaning is the experience of freedom. And acceptance of death is really the acceptance of a life lived. Thank you very much. So I didn't realize, I thought we had to finish at 10 and I was late, 15 minutes. So who asked us this question? You did? So you're... There are a lot of people who weren't there yesterday? Okay, all right. So these were the results of our randomized controlled trial of meaning-centered psychotherapy, which we developed in two formats, a group format and an individual format. And the meaning-centered psychotherapy was developed based on some of the concepts of Viktor Frankl's work. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist from Vienna who lived after World War II, wrote about the importance of meaning in human existence. He saw meaning as that he saw the desire to find meaning in human existence as a third basic primary motivating force of human nature, of human behavior. Frankl believed that life had meaning and never ceased to have meaning, or that from the very first moment of life to the last moment of life, life had meaning, or there was the possibility of experiencing meaning. And that finally we had free will, and that we had the freedom to find meaning in our existence by choosing the attitude we took towards suffering or any limitation. The other important part of meaning-centered psychotherapy is that there are some basic sources of meaning that we can teach patients that they can use as resources for coping. And basically there are 4 sources of meaning. The first sort, I talked a little bit before about the importance of dedicating yourself to something, to someone. Those are the first 2 sources of meaning. The creative sources of meaning that derive meaning through our work and through what we care about in the world, through engaging in life. The second source of meaning is experiential sources of meaning, through love, through experiencing the world with our senses, nature, art, beauty, food, music, etc. Finally, the historical sources of meaning. Our lives have meaning because of the legacy we inherited, the legacy we live, the legacy we leave behind. Meaning occurs in historical context. And finally, meaning is derived from the attitude we choose to take towards limitations and existential problems. And this is Frankl. I don't know. Do we have sound here? No. Okay.
Microphone.
Meaning-centered psychotherapy. This is the 7 sessions of individual meaning-centered psychotherapy. The psychotherapy starts out with an introductory session. The therapy is, for the group, it's an hour and a half, usually 6 or 8 patients. The individual format is 1 hour, one-on-one intervention. The first session focuses on, it's a very didactic therapy. There's a didactic component, and then there's an experiential component where patients respond to a certain set of stimulus questions and discuss that, which tries to have them learn more deeply what we're trying to teach them in terms of the concept of the importance of meaning and how meaning can enhance their sense of well-being, and how they can identify various sources of meaning in their lives and reconnect to them. If they feel that life has no meaning, it's because they've become disconnected from meaning. And so we try to teach them to reconnect to sources of meaning, or to move from one source of meaning to another. So the first session focuses on an introduction to meaning-centered psychotherapy, and we introduce the concept of meaning. The second session focuses on how cancer has affected meaning, and we focus on identity before and after cancer. The third session focuses on the historical sources of meaning, where they tell us the story of their lives and their ancestors and what the legacy they want to leave behind. The fourth session focuses on encountering life's limitations, and part of that experiential exercise in that session focuses on what they think a good or meaningful death would be like. The fifth session focuses on creative sources of meaning, meaning that they derive from engaging in life, through creativity and responsibility, creating their lives, their work, the kind of life they wanted to create for themselves, and now disrupted. The sixth session focuses on experiential sources of meaning, connecting to life through love, beauty, humor. And the last session is a final session which will review what was learned in the course of the previous 6 sessions, and we review a legacy project, and we have an experiential exercise where they talk about hopes for the future. And that's the basic concepts of meaning-centered.
那很谢谢那个陈医师提醒哦，那这就做一个很好的 review。不知道大家还有没有其他问题？请。如果可以用英文最好啊，如果有困难可以试试。
I will. Thanks, Dr. Breitbart, for your excellent talk. And I'm a medical oncologist, and I've been fed up with the clinical trial, so I won't discuss that, and I won't ask anything about that. It's the recently, I discussed with one of our neurosurgeons in our hospital, and he mentioned there's a book called The Proof of Heaven, which was written by Dr. Eben. He's a Harvard trainee neurosurgeon, and
Near-death experience.
yeah, the near-death experience. And during that book, he mentioned it's not only near-death experience. He also visualized during that kind of experience telling. He mentioned about that there's a blonde reaching out both hands for him, and finally he is miraculously come back without any sequelae. And he mentioned that woman happened to be his sister. He never met, but the sister was dead several years ago, and but he never met his sister before. So this kind of near-death experience, do you think it's kind of connection to the real world, or only just the extension of the after-death experience of the after-death world? Do you think this kind of evidence is pretty persuasive, or I would like to hear your comment on that.
Well, one of the things that I think you may have noticed when I was talking about existential and spiritual issues is that I really didn't talk very much about metaphysical constructs, God or heaven or souls or things like that. And meaning-centered psychotherapy that I developed is a very secularly oriented intervention. Our definition of spirituality is a very simple one in terms of what I mentioned earlier when Carl Sagan talks about any human being that contemplates their place in the universe is engaging in a spiritual exercise. Even if you look at the word religion or religious, from the Latin, it means re-legare, to try to tie together. And so in fact, it's merely the human being engaging and trying to tie together the questions of where did I come from, what am I doing here, where am I going? We focused on meaning because one of the main measures that we use in our outcomes, one of our outcome measures in our trials, is the Facet Spiritual Well-Being Scale. And this scale has two components. It has a meaning subscale and it has a faith subscale. And for the most part, the faith subscale taps into religion-based kinds of ideas, belief in God, a belief in the values of an organized religious system, practicing the rituals of an organized religious system, belief in heaven or biblical God or something like that. And what we've been able to show in our research is that when you look at what aspects of spiritual well-being buffer against depression, symptom distress, suicidal ideation, hopelessness, desire for death, quality of life. It's not so much the faith component of spiritual well-being, but the meaning component. And so we wanted to develop a counseling intervention that was secular and was not religious, and that could be universally utilized in a medical setting where it didn't matter if there was a mismatch between the religion of the patient, the religion of the physician, or the clinician, or if one was religious, the other one wasn't, one was an atheist. So meaning we thought of as a universal secular language of spirituality. Now, in the course of doing meaning-centered psychotherapy, there are patients who have strong religious beliefs, and they may find great meaning in connectedness, but they might find great meaning not just in connection with the people they love, their family members and parents, but their connection with God. And this is quite legitimate, and we talk about that in the group. We don't necessarily promote it as a way of coping. We don't promote it as something to believe in so that you can do better. Although we have done some studies that show that, we did one study in the palliative care unit where patients who did have a strong belief in a life after death had less anxiety before death than patients who didn't. So there's sometimes advantages to believing these things. And all of us grow up in a culture, and the cultures that we grow up in and that we live in, some of them have various explanations for what lies beyond. And so there's an element, there's an aspect, there are many cultures in our world that strongly believe that something exists beyond the physical realm, that there is a metaphysical existence that occurs. And so stories like this, like the one that you quote, are very powerful, particularly when they come from a scientist, particularly when they come from a physician, a scientist, because science tells us that we can only believe and have faith in things that we can empirically prove. So in religion, one has faith, but that faith is not affected by new facts. In science, what we believe what we believe to be true can change when new facts arise. It's the main difference between science. And some people feel science killed God, right? So when a scientist says there is this metaphysical world that exists, that is very powerful testimony for people whose culture fosters and values a belief in some kind of metaphysical existence. My opinion is that what lies beyond this life, for me, is a mystery. It's uncertain and it's a mystery. And within mystery lies infinite possibilities. Right? So if there are infinite possibilities, what you describe is one of them. And I don't know if that helps answer your question. Now, as a scientist, I might have alternative explanations for this person's experience, but I'm also open enough to know that we as scientists can't necessarily explain everything. And the more we know about the physics of the universe and this and that, the more we discover what we don't know. So there is plenty of mystery left in the universe.